Welcome to Innovate Presents Entrepreneurs in Tech. Today we're delighted to have our guest, Thomas Bertels, who is the founder and president of Purpose Work Consulting, or Works, I'm sorry, yes, Works Consulting. Thomas, thank you for joining us today. And for our viewers and listeners who might not be familiar with you, if you don't mind introducing yourself and provide us a bit of insights on your background and expertise. And then we'll dive into it.
Happy to do so and delighted to be here, Bob. Thank you for
My
having
pleasure.
me on the show.
Absolutely.
So my name is Thomas Bertels. As you said, I'm the founder and president of Purpose Works Consulting. I am a consultant on a mission to make work better, to make it both more productive and valuable, but also more meaningful and impactful. And I draw on 25 years of experience working with companies from really, really large, so Fortune 5, to smaller startup-like organizations on changing how work gets done. So I started out as a line manager at a company called Azea Brown Boveri, like a long time ago. Then I worked for a consulting firm that got acquired by Aon Consulting. And then I had the pleasure of co-founding a firm with some colleagues, and we had a nice 18-year run. And so this is my next chapter at Purpose Works. And so I've been doing that now for 4 years.
Amazing. I love the word purpose that you added into the title of the company. Yes, it gives it more of a purpose. Absolutely. It really does. Thomas, what got you started in customer focus roles at ABB?
Yeah, it was a little bit by accident, right? So when I graduated from high school, I needed a job. And I discovered a very innovative undergrad program. It's like a co-op style program that was done in partnership with a company called Azea Brown Boveri. I grew up in Germany. Normally in Germany, university is like, you go for 4 or 5 years, like 10 semesters, you get your degree, and then you have no real experience, right? So this core program was really a 3-year program, and you would study for 8 weeks, and then you would apply it for 8 weeks. So you were and learned all about procurement, and then you were in procurement and realized how the sausage gets made. And I really loved that. So that kind of got me started at ABB. And at the end of that program, I needed to find a real job. And so I talked to the CEO of that business unit that I was in. And he strongly suggested to me that I spend 3 years so I can sales to learn the business from the ground up to prepare me for a management career. And so that's what I ended up doing.
Amazing. Any key lessons from running the customer center at ABB?
A couple of things. I mean, one is so when I was put in charge of this group of, initially 10, 12, 15 people, I was, 23. And I quickly realized that I knew very little, and my subordinates, if you want to call them that, knew a lot more. And so I realized that, you really got to adopt a servant leadership role and make it about making your people effective. And it's not about what you know. It's really about what they want to do. I think the second thing I learned at ABB was that you get what you measure. We had a corporate customers quality program that measured how we were doing against on-time delivery and all these other metrics. And one of the things that we were doing is we're measuring on-time delivery, and we were always at 99.9%. Because we didn't quite measure it right. So I also learned that, as you change those metrics and align them really with the customer incentives, you should maybe prior to that talk that through with your CEO.
Yeah.
And the last thing I think I learned, the power of ownership. So the organization where I was in, both the salespeople but also the support people were directly aligned to customers and customer groups. And that made it really impactful because you had a direct relationship and you felt responsible for supporting the business in the Nordics or supporting the business in South America. And you were accountable versus you're one of many and orders just come in and you couldn't tell the difference between customer A and customer B. So those are some of the things I learned from those early years.
Well, being there, how did that shape your career or your future into leadership style early on?
Yeah, one is, as I said before, right, I think there's a servant leadership aspect to that. I think the second piece is, I think it's all about collaboration, right? Because your customers expect you to come through, but you really need all the other functions to play their part. You need the manufacturing folks to make the
Yes.
parts. You need the warehouse to package them up. You need the accounts receivables people to send the invoice and so forth, right? And so I think developing those muscles and those relationships, I think, is really critical. And I think, like a lot of people, rightfully so, focus directly on like what's in their area of control. But I think you shouldn't underestimate all these other areas and stakeholders that you also got to influence.
What motivated you to make the shift from being a manager at ABB to become a management consultant with Rath and Strong?
Yeah, I was when I was at ABB, I got like pulled into like a really interesting transformation program that ran over a number of years. And just to give you like an idea, so the business unit that I was in, it had about 2,000 people in 2 locations. And it was maybe about $100 million, $150 million in revenue. And it was barely breaking even. We had 80,000 part numbers. And we had a CEO who was very commercially minded and very smart. And so over 4 years, we eliminated complexity wherever we found it. And the business got to the point where we could drive about 2 times the revenue with about 500 part numbers. Wow. And instead of 2,000 people, it was more like 500 people, right? So I saw firsthand what's possible if you really pull all the levers that are at your disposal. And so that was one. The second thing is in my undergrad program, I had done like a little research project on organizational learning. How do companies learn and adjust? And I had the good fortune that a professor partnered with me, and we turned that into a book. So I was fairly young, and I had like a business book to my name, and so right. I also realized that being in a company like ABB, which was like an engineering type company, if you're at a business undergrad, the number of roles that you can play are fairly limited, right? And so I decided that I wanted to take like some of my interest, right? How do companies change? As well as really broaden my experience beyond like this one very successful program at ABB and really learn more systematically, right? How do companies transform itself? And I had the great pleasure to join Rath and Strong, which was really a small boutique company. It was like a 70-year history. That was one of the first companies to really appreciate that if you want to change an organization, you got to take the people along. So they had like a sociotech approach to change, and so that was really something that really taught me like the fundamentals of being an effective consultant.
Let's talk about some of the big wins that you had at Rath and Strong, and what were some of the challenges there?
Yeah, I think there's like maybe 2 things that come to mind. One was when I started out there, like in 97, 98, the company had the good fortune to be one of the suppliers for GE Capital's Six Sigma rollout. Right, you might remember Jack Welch in the late 90s basically decided everybody at GE got to do Six Sigma, and they had built a very substantial financial services business. And so these tools and techniques that had worked so well in manufacturing to make the jet engines fly longer and so forth, they were trying to apply the same ideas to things like equipment leasing or reinsurance. And that, I think, was both, a fantastic assignment because it really stretched us. But I think it was also a really big challenge because these guys had the attention span of a gnat, right? So the time it took you to say Six Sigma was already way too long, right? So they were very focused. And so that was going through a transformation and taking these ideas into an area where people are not so familiar with it, I think was a good challenge. The other project that comes to mind was we did the Six Sigma rollout for TRW, which was back then like a 150,000 people conglomerate, and just like the ambition of the CEO who wanted to train every exempt employee as a green belt, basically required us like overnight to build the capacity to run 40, 50 training classes in the same week in locations all over the world, right? So that was, I think, both a huge win, but also a real challenge to really scale up what the organization was capable
of. Let's talk about one of the driving reasons that made you found Veliocon in 2004.
Yeah. So one is if you're like let's say if you're like a $40 million consulting practice as part of like an $8 billion company, you're a rounding error. right? And so it was just, I think Aon is a great company, is a wonderful company, but I think, again, being a small consulting practice in a large insurance company and, HR consulting business, I think certainly gave us, I think, some processes and systems that just overwhelmed the company. Right? It just made it, it was not a lot of fun. The second one is, I think myself and a couple of other guys were getting tired of just selling training courses. We're looking to help clients get results. And so the idea of selling another 20 Greenbelt classes was not terribly enticing. And the last thing is, I think that in our conversation we realized, I think there is an opportunity for a global boutique that helps clients get results. Like a different format than, let's say, your McKinsey, Bain, Boston Consulting type firms, right? So we wanted to build a global world-class firm that could, try to go toe-to-toe with those big guys.
Yeah. And how did you grow it over the years?
One client and one project at a time. I think that's, in my experience, quite frankly, the only way you really grow a consulting business. And it evolves, right? I think we moved from initially a very strong focus on process improvement, operational excellence, to really elevate what we were capable of doing, really moving into operating model transformation. How do you work on all the levers, people, process, structure, technology? So it's an evolution, right? And so it grows organically over time if you keep pounding away at it.
You led the ValueCon US practice for 15 years and also served 2 years as the firm's global managing partner. What did that experience kind of, teach you about building a global consumer business, consulting business? I'm sorry.
I mean, a couple of things. One is we started out, right? We started out like it was a bit like a joke, right? You have 2 Americans, 2 Italians, 2 Germans, 1 Japanese, right? Who started consulting business. And so we started out in 4 or 5 locations at the same time. And I think in retrospect, that's probably not a path I would recommend, right? Because it's really, really hard. Because you're now basically doing everything 5 times over, right? That was one. I think the second one is don't treat every revenue dollar as of equal value. Because there's some work, right, that's it's like stale bread, right? You've done it a million times. It's not challenging, right? It's yesterday's work. And then there's tomorrow's work that builds new capabilities, new skills, and so forth. And if you just look at the dollar revenue, they probably have the same value. Maybe even the stale work from yesteryear is probably more profitable because you got to put less effort into it. And so I think it's really, important to be very clear about where's the future? Where do we invest? What's the past that we need to forget? And measure something else besides just dollars. And maybe the third piece is, the world, I think Paul Krugman said the world is flat. That might be true, but the world is also, I think, a very complex place. And I think markets are different, right? What sells in the States might be a big topic in France 5-10 years from now, right? But things go in waves around the world. And secondly, the cultural differences are real, right? So I think the way the Germans like to manage is very different than the Americans or the Japanese or the French. And so I think maybe today we know more about this, but back then when we did this, it's humbling, right? I think you got to be very flexible and really challenge your beliefs about how the world works if you work in that global context.
In 2019, just before COVID, you and your partner decided to merge ValueCon with a consulting practice, Bird & Bird, which is a leading international law firm, to create Oxygy. Am I right? What prompted that move? What made you say, hey, let's take that path?
Yeah, I think it's so myself and the 6 other partners, we succeed, I think, in building it up to, I want to say about 100 consultants worldwide.
Yeah.
But you kind of you hit a wall. And we wanted to grow further, and we thought that, partnering up with a company like Bird & Bird, who has 500 partners, 2,000 lawyers, right? If every partner just sells one project, we would have 500 projects.
Yes.
So that was the idea. It was also, I think, driven by the realization that, lawyers, I think in general, work on interesting business problems like how do you internationalize your business, or right, what's the impact of new regulations that also, I think, offer promising consulting opportunities. And so my colleagues basically decided that if we really wanted to grow, we would probably have to go into a partnership with somebody else.
I noticed from our conversation and looking at your accolades and achievements, you keep moving. You always keep reinventing, innovating, and going forward. That's the entrepreneurial side of you, Thomas, because you decided to leave, once this, after Oxygen, you wanted to start a new chapter, and obviously had a new vision and your mission and your idea of launching Purpose Works Consulting. And how do you differentiate that from your previous roles and previous ventures?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, right? It's the same, right? Consulting, it's
Yes.
the same profession. I think for me, I think I wanted to go back to my roots, right? I think when we were at Oxygen, we were doing a lot of different things, right? Internationalization, regulatory compliance, innovation, change management, process improvement. And I gotta say, it's like, I'm German, to be competent, right? I like to know something about something. And so I wanted to go something that's more closer to my roots and my passions. And so I really thought about what's the work that I truly enjoyed the most. And it was really working with teams, working with leadership teams, and really making a real change to how the work gets done and making it better. Getting rid of stupid processes, complexities, things that get in the way, right? And just make work a little bit better, a little bit more interesting, and take people along for the journey. And I decided, I think there's a business there, because what I also saw in 25 years of consulting, again, I had the pleasure and the privilege to work with some very well-known companies that, all the case studies are being written about. Yeah. And if you look inside these organizations, it's oftentimes not as pretty as people, look at it from the outside. And so my reflection has been over 20, 25 years that in a lot of places work is fundamentally broken. People show up and they want to make an impact and they want to make a dent in the universe, and there's a million things that frustrate them and get in the way and just suck the life out of them. And I thought that that's a problem we're solving.
So you saw a gap there. It's like, that's what drove you to go back to your roots and start again your new venture. How has your mission to work more meaningful, and evolved since launching Purpose Work Consulting?
Yeah, it's interesting. One is, if you think about the challenge of fixing work, right? Let's say you're a middle manager in a large company, right?
Yes.
I think that task can seem daunting, right? I think you need a lot of conviction. You need a lot of courage.
Yes.
Oftentimes the incentives are stacked against you, right? So it's not an easy job. And we put out the book Fixing Work with the idea to really show people that there is, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can make work productive and impactful for the customers, and at the same time interesting and motivating for the people. And we tried to outline this roadmap. But one thing I realized is, I think even if you spell that out, again, it's like people's incentives are not aligned, right? So one of the pivots we made is really to say, you know what? That we think the topic is still important, but we got to embed it into a different way for middle managers to approach it that more directly aligns with the challenge that they have, right? So that's one example for, I think, how things have iterated a little bit. The other pieces, you just build out, you build out parts of the framework over time, right? So one of the first things we did was put together a diagnostic that measures how well designed the work is. Because again, people love numbers. So this one is a little bit gives you a CAT scan, right? You see where the pain in the organization is and where to start, right?
Yes.
So again, it's I think you always have to. I think it's always a challenge for consultants to make their work accessible for clients. Right?
Well, I guess
help the clients figure out how they can tap into the power
correct.
of these ideas.
Yes. All of that ties into fixing work. The book that behind you, we cannot avoid it, obviously. Up on your left, up on your right, there's a stack there. And I have the book. I read it. Very interesting. But, for our viewers and listeners, I'm going to let you talk about it. How did idea came about? And also, the book was co-written with a mutual friend who's somebody going to be on the show also. And he's also on the board of directors of Innovate Tech Inc., I would say, startup consulting company. Let's talk about it. What drove the idea of Fix and Work with you and David? How do you guys say, hey, let's team up and put all of this together and bring it out there, make it available for everybody?
Yeah, there was like three key moments. One is I want to say in 1998, as part of my MBA program, NYU, one of the readings in the operations class was a book called The Goal, which is like the first, the first business favorites that was actually a bestseller. And I love that book. It's I still love this book. It's one of my top 10 books. Why? Because it's written like a novel. It reads like a thriller. It's 400 pages. I have to admit, I have a lot of business books here. There's very few where I got past page 40, right? So I thought it was a great way to tell a story and engage the reader. And then in 2004, I got introduced to this idea of work design. At that point in time, I had spent 7, 8, 9 years working with leading companies around the world to teach them how to improve productivity by making the process better. And I realized that there's another side to the coin, right? So how does the work... one piece is, do we make processes effective and efficient? The other one is, how do people experience the work? Yes. And if you put these two sides together, you got something, right? You get results. And so I got introduced to this idea in 2004, and I was like, I got to do something with it. And then in 2021, 22, I was meeting with David over a meal. We were catching up, and I was telling him all the stuff I was doing around work design. And he says, I think you should write a book about this. And I'm like, David, I've written books before. It's a lot of work. And then David said, I'll write it with you. And so that was kind of the starting point for the journey. I really appreciate him jumping on the ship and putting the story together.
Amazing. Looking back at your journey, Thomas, what advice you'll have to young entrepreneurs who are starting and they're trying to carve their own path?
I think one is, I think it's really important to spell out your business model and then figure out what assumptions you made and figure out a way to test them and challenge them and see if that's truly the case. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the model. I think Steve Blank, has written about it, right? And I think it's like in line with like this agile startup idea. But again, it's like no initial plan survives you, right? Encounter with reality. And I think it's definitely true for startups. Mm-hmm. And so, what I thought, right, how this is going to play out 3.5 years for has really evolved. And so having that in front of you and saying, here are my assumptions, right? How can I test it? I think is really important. I want to say the second piece is be very clear about your culture and what you value, what's important to you. And I think that goes back into startups. Right? We're always pressed for, new revenue, new funding, new clients, new projects, new this, new that, right? You're always deprived. And so sometimes there's the temptation to just take people that maybe not quite live up to your values, but you got a hole to plug, right? And I think you end up paying the price later on 5 times over. So I think be clear about the culture and not compromising on some of these things, I think is absolutely critical.
Thomas, would you think AI will start to play a role in the near future in the consulting business and a lot of the roles that you've been throughout your career? Would you think that slowly, I wouldn't say start creeping in, but once AI comes in, it start to infiltrate a lot of divisions, a lot of roles?
Yeah, I absolutely, right? Absolutely. I mean, you already see it's like in law firms, right? So entry level lawyer roles like associates, that used to draft contracts and it's like learned the business from the ground up, right? Those opportunities are going to be gone. right? I think so. I think that work is going to disappear. I think it's going to face a lot of pressure on leaders to reimagine and recreate work, and I don't think that people are terribly prepared for that. I think a lot of leaders, like, we have this mindset of like, we're going to make this one big change and then we're going to be good for 2 years. And that, I think that worked in the 90s, right? Maybe it worked still in the year 2000. It definitely doesn't work today anymore. Right? It's like, I think in my experience, these larger organizations, it's like an ongoing construction zone, right? And the work is never done. And so everything is changing at the same time, all the time. And I think it's just leaders need to become a lot more dynamic to be effective in that environment, right? And I mean, I think there's going to be some easy, low-hanging use cases for AI that people are going to go after, right? So a little automation here. But I think for people to really win in this, I think you got to build broad organization capabilities to use this technology. And so I think it provides also a chance to run 1,000 experiments at the same time versus just making one big bet sanctioned by the IT department. But I think it's just going to require a different way of working.
Well, right now, as you see, there's a lot of flux of entrepreneurs and new ideas of every sector, every field that you could think of and never thought of even. And also everybody taking the positive side. I don't know if it's fear behind it, where yes, AI is an enhancement tool. I agree. Technology always been an enhancement tool, always an advancement. Oh yes, but with new opportunities, new technology, the new jobs, new things to study. Is that going to be true or not really? Or we're just saying it just to kind of stay positive?
I think there's some truth to that. I'm not sure if I believe that prompt engineer is going to be really a job in the future.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I know maybe it's a course at the university, right? Or like a 2-hour lecture. So I don't think I want to go that far. But I think it certainly has, I think in the short run, I think it's going to be incremental. I think in the long run, it's definitely going to be transformational. I had the good privilege of starting it's like my career before the internet, right? So I remember, right, these brown inter-office envelopes, and right, people would make phone calls and so forth. And I think email started around 94, 95, 96, right? It took a while. It took 6, 7 years for us to fully see the impact. And there's a lot of second order effects that people, I don't think, appreciate from the get-go. For example, right, we now know that every email, every text messages, all these little pings, right, they take away our attention, right? They constantly disrupt us and prevent us from doing deep, meaningful, impactful work, right? So on the one side, we have this technology that allowed us asynchronous communication and sped things up. At the same time, it really destroyed something. I have the sense that maybe with AI, we're going to end up in a similar space where we're going to speed up and automate some things. But I think we're also going to lose, I think, some capabilities that maybe afterwards we forget. Or we paint ourselves in a corner where, we become really, really dependent on these things and these technologies. And so I think there's always two sides to that coin.
It's funny you mentioned something. You said a prompt engineer. I don't know if this is something we're going to carry on for long. But to me, a prompt engineer, it's like when Google came out. How come we never called it a prompt or prompt engineer search, a search engineer, for Google? To me, it's kind of similar. If you know how to, if you're a search engineer, then you're a prompt engineer. It's the same way of using Google search. There's people that say they're really good at searching and finding things out. Similar, but I guess with every technology, new things get created. I don't know if these things will last long or just temporary for now, because later on everybody becomes a prompt engineer.
Yeah, correct. And I also think there's also, I think we have this tendency to think that kind of like, right, we have to throw everything out and start from scratch. I don't think that that's true. I think a lot of executives completely underestimate the ability of their employees to reinvent and reimagine their own careers, build new skills. I mean, if you look at every successful leader, right? It's not like people said, "Oh yeah, I want to become blah 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 CEO," and they had this very linear right path, right? It just doesn't work this way. Life is a lot full of serendipity. It creates opportunities, and I sometimes feel like we treat it as like, oh, the old right, the current workforce, they just can't get there. We're gonna have to get new people, new jobs, new everything, and I think that's a mistake. I think you got to invest in people broadly. I think you got to build these skills. Is everybody going to become a very effective user of AI? No. But you know what? Those people, they know your processes, they know your culture, they know your customers, right? How about you upgrade them and set them up to at least, be more effective in the future, and be able to, adapt to the needs that the business has versus saying, you guys are no good. We need a new team. Out with the old, in with the new.
So what you're saying is a lot of the board of directors, a lot of the big company or the upper management should really change this whole corporate culture and start reinvesting in their employees, the people who carried them, who made them who they are right now. They got them at the position they're in. Instead of looking for different teams, do the transition, but make the team, the current people that work in there, part of that team, enhance their ability, invest more. And not a lot of that you're saying going on.
I don't see it. I mean, if you think about it, right, it's like, where do leaders and their teams have the capacity not just work in the business, but actually on the business and improving the business?
Yes.
Right? There are companies, right? I think 3M is famous for, right, giving employees 20% of their time to work on innovations. I think Google had that before, right? The year of prosperity or productivity came in. But I think that's incredibly important. Right? If you're overloaded and your workload is 110% of your capacity, you're not going to build the future. You're going to barely keep up with the present.
Yes.
Right? So how do you create the capacity that allows people to experiment, to play, spin up a little AI model, take it out for a test drive, figure out whether it has value, figure out whether it makes to scale it up and reinvest. And I think if we're relying on like the corporate AI department with the 1,700 prompt engineers to do this, right, for us, I think a lot of leaders are going to wait a long time for help, right? So I think there's something to be done now, which is how do we create capacity to build new things while we optimize what we currently have? And I just don't think that anybody is preparing leaders for that challenge.
Well, I guess that will take us back to Fix and Work, to that book behind you. Where can people get a copy of it? Amazon?
I think you can get it everywhere. You can definitely get it on Amazon. I think Barnes & Noble has it. You can, right? There's booksellers. Porchlight Books, I think, sells it. So the book's been out for a year now. I think we're coming up to the first anniversary, and I'm proud to say that it has several awards, and it is a bestseller.
It is amazing. Well, I read the book, and I have to say I'll stand by it. Get your copy of Fix and Work. I guess entrepreneurs in tech, we do stand behind it. Absolutely. Thomas, what's next for Tom?
I think it's going to be a little bit more of the same, right? I think we're building up our diagnostic. We're building up some of our offerings around like equipping, right, middle managers to really keep up with the rate of change. And maybe eventually we expand back internationally, but for the time being, I think it's easy to be busy enough in North America. So that's kind of what's up for the next 2 or 3 years. I am working on a new book, but I'm making very slow progress, so this might take a while.
So would you leak the title for us or no? No
Not
teasers.
Yet.
No teasers. Not yet. I guess in the next interview, definitely. So would you say like the first quarter of 2025 or the second quarter? Probably the book will be ready.
Yeah, it's probably the second quarter, to just like being realistic about these things.
Yes, amazing. Well, Tom, I just want to say thank you for joining us today at Innovate Presents Entrepreneurs in Tech. It was definitely an honor and extremely insightful, enjoyable conversation, definitely. Be sure to join us and connect with us on social media. Until next time, keep innovating, stay curious, and think out of the box. And thank you and take care.
Thanks, Bob.
My pleasure. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share Innovate Presents Entrepreneurs in Tech podcast. And if you're joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.